When I talk about commodities on this channel, such as grains or even livestock, I talk about global scale. And what you're looking at right here, this is just Google Earth on my computer. Um, Google Earth is zoomed out, and you can see it's just a globe. And you can zoom in and look at your house or even street view. It's pretty neat. But right here is the United States, Canada, Mexico. And as you rotate the old globe around, which most of you guys probably had these globes growing up in grade school, but rotate around, you got your different continents. Well, anybody that needs a refresher or understanding, again, commodities are on a global scale. At the center of the Earth, or the center of a ball, is the equator. So if it's summer here, below the equator, it's winter here, and then vice versa. So, equator, summer, summer, equator, winter. Summer, equator, winter. It's opposite. Now, on Google Earth, you can clearly tell that the browns are your deserts, and your greens are where your vegetation's at. So you can see that the food gets growing where the green's at. Now when you get close to that equator line, the temperatures really are equal parts, meaning it's no summer or winter right on the equator. And as you can tell, that Brazil, being the equator, is really close to the equator line, which is why they're allowing or have the ability to double crop. And you can see there's a lot of green. It's a very lush continent that produces a lot of agriculture. So you can take many rural areas on Google Earth and you can zoom in. There, for example, is France. Now, I bet as you look amongst that nice green vegetation and get out into the country and zoom in tighter and tighter, you'll probably start to see farm fields. And sure enough, there they are. There's some hay bales and obviously farmland. And you can do this pretty much anywhere in the world and spend some time on the internet here or on Google Earth, zooming around, seeing what's being farmed or where the cities are at. And as you get to places like Brazil, you start to see very vast, large fields. And it just goes on and on forever. It's all around the world. There's agriculture all around the world. Where they can farm it, they farm it. It's quite neat. Go spend some time on Google Earth and you'll start to see what's raised where. Now, for example, we farm in Iowa, and just say this part of the United States was all that was farmed, and you only get a crop annually because we're in the northern hemisphere where they just don't have the ability to double crop much unless you're in the southern states. And say that all of maybe China was depending upon that little area feeding them. Well, they starved to death. The only reason that other parts of the world are able to eat is because there's food being raised somewhere all the time everywhere. And there's for example, they say there's always a wheat crop within a few days of harvest. I mean, whether it's going to be in Australia where it's coming on and that grain goes north, or whether it's raised in the north and that grain goes south, there's always food coming online somewhere. Well, as expected, the channel is not getting a lot of views, but a few of you have been watching and asking questions along the way, and as promised, I said I would make this into an open table discussion. So, Will Johnson, thank you for the question. Why are farmers holding their hand out? I always have a problem reading when I'm holding a phone and trying to read through the screen of the phone or trying to look above it to read the question. I literally hold a phone up to my desktop computer here. Why are so many farmers holding their hand out when they could grow other commodities or market their own products other than corn or soy? But no, everyone wants more acres, more equipment, more stress. you'll tell me it's not possible. Others are doing it. Also, I'd like to know your thoughts on CRP. I know a lot of farmers hate it, but there's another section of land they aren't competing against in the market. To which I did reply to him, stating that out of 12 years of doing YouTube, I have actually asked for an alternative market or told guys to come up with one for me, and I never have had a single commenter yet to actually do that. I spray potatoes, wheat, milo, cotton, alfalfa, and spread cover crops. I know up there y'all can grow lentils, peas, durum, sugar beets, and let's not go for grass. Organic is a booming market with high premiums and better margins. I spray organic cotton as well. Those are other markets that are not so saturated. To my knowledge, cotton takes like 180 days of growing. We don't have that. We have like 115 day, 130 day max growing season here. I'm in western Iowa. We could grow wheat. We have grown wheat on our farm. It's over 100 miles one way, one direction, 200 miles round trip, over 200 miles actually, to drop one load of wheat with a semi, so your trucking costs go through the roof. And we often get pretty hot here, so double cropping is not always a great thing. We can also grow milo here. Yes, again, probably 100 miles one way for a place to sell it for, and the selling price of it's not very good. And we also have had some issues with late rains destroying. It's just not a great crop. Alfalfa, we have grown that here, but again, we are very, very hot and dry, which would also answer your question to lentils, peas, sugar beets. Those would be things that would have to go to northern Iowa or into Minnesota. We just can't grow them here. Yes, they will grow, but as far as viable yield, they do not do well where we're at. Basically, we're just across from Omaha, Nebraska. I mean, if anybody wants to know where our farm's at. So on our particular farm, we just can't grow a lot of things just because of weather. So I took Google Earth and I took a screenshot of the United States only, just for this example, and as you can see, I drew some dots on it. Minnesota, one in Iowa, Illinois, western Nebraska, and I got these darker dots down here in Texas and Colorado. Now, this would be a good topic of diversity, which seems to be a very popular thing to talk about on the internet right now for the savior of farmers. As I just said, we can't really grow certain crops on our farm in our geographical region just because we don't have the right weather. We don't have the right soils. Yeah, we can grow potatoes here, but they get about, that big, and they're not going to be like an Idaho growing potato. We can't grow a banana tree here unless it's going to be in a greenhouse. It's just very limited due to bad weather. I mean, things are grown by region because of conditions. I mean, there's a reason that they grow almonds and stuff out in California and not in North Dakota. It's weather, it's soil conditions, it's all sorts of stuff like that. So for an example, though, if you were to take this Iowa farmer who now raises corn and soybeans only, and this Minnesota farmer who now raises corn and soybeans only, and then you got a Nebraska farmer here who raises a lot of cattle and just a little bit of irrigated corn, and a Central Illinois farmer who primarily just raises corn just because he's under really, really good conditions. So that's what they are raising now, because that's just what grows the best and has the best ROI, return rate, on their conditions. Now maybe you take these two darker dots and all they can have is cattle because that's a very rough area. So if this Iowa farmer, whose land's going to be a lot higher price because it can grow things that are higher in gross dollars, such as corn, versus this guy here. So now he starts raising cows, and if he raises 5 extra cows, that probably means that this guy needs to raise 5 less cows. Because if there's only so many people in the United States that eat a certain quantity of cow each, that's how a market gets dictated. Too many cattle equal an overabundant supply of cattle versus the amount of mouths that are eating it. An under amount of cattle with too many people wanting cattle to eat means that they're willing to pay up for it. But you got to remember that's also largely based on what the Federal Reserve's doing. Are we in a system of tightening? Right now we're in a system of tightening. So if people are more financially strapped after inflation, that means that their amount of cows that they're going to want to eat becomes less, because they go down to Walmart and they say, well, I'm not going to buy that higher dollar steak because the steak has inflated. We've had inflation, we had currency devaluation. I need to buy shoes for the kids, and I'm just going to trim that back to just base hamburger, and we're even going to cut that back maybe to rice. They look for cheaper alternatives. Remember, quantity is what consumes. So, you have to look at the offset number of what would be able to be raised. Now, if this Iowa ground or this Minnesota ground, maybe the Minnesota guy's going to do the same thing. Maybe these farms are worth $15,000 an acre because they can raise higher priced stuff, whereas this ground here's worth $3,000 an acre because it's not viable to raise other stuff on besides one selective thing. So if these guys were to diversify, yes, it would eliminate corn acres, but you're also looking at putting cattle in there that are on high priced ground, and that cattle numbers is going to push this guy down. So this guy can't do something else with his ground. It's just an offset. So if this guy has corn and soybeans, and this guy has cattle only, now this guy is going to add 5 cows, which basically means this guy has to delete 5 cows. Now, if this guy adds 5 cows, this guy adds 5 more to his herd, now you got 10 extra cows. Now you just devalued the cattle market. You flooded the cattle market. Yes, you took corn out of production to raise these extra cows, but you flooded the cattle market. Meanwhile, this guy here in Illinois, who did not put the cows in, now all of a sudden his corn's worth more money, which does nothing more than promote corn prices, which in the guy in Minnesota who was on the fence, well, corn went up because this guy put the cows in, took some of the corn out. Now I'm going to raise more corn. I'm going to raise more corn. This guy here is now diversified, and this guy over here is just fucked. That is literally how boom and bust cycles occur within an economic system. So as far as farmers being able to quote, diversify more, well, they kind of did in a way. They kind of are. I mean, if you're raising lettuce here, cattle here, corn here, maybe tomatoes here, I mean, you are diversified. I mean, the USDA looks at this as one big field. They don't look at it as, oh, Joe's field here, and that's what he has to diversify. No, they look at it as one big field of what's raised rare. And they look at quantity of goods. So if you took this whole area here and circle this is all potatoes, circle this whole area, this is corn, circle it here, they say, okay, which one of these areas is going to yield what? I mean, that's kind of how a market works. They don't just say, okay, let's just split this in half and switch this half to potatoes and half to corn, then go over here and do the same. So as far as saying, like, for us in western Iowa here, I mean, to say, hey, let's go down here and compete with what Kansas is growing, which Kansas markets, I mean, what's their profit margin? 3, 4, 5% on a Milo? I mean, I'm making 3% on corn. The problem is that the 3% doesn't have good buying power. The Milo doesn't have good. Flooding another market or just transferring a market doesn't change the margin value. So back to Google Earth here. Canada, there's things in Canada they can produce better than they can produce in the United States, and there's things they can produce in the United States they cannot produce in Canada. That's how it works. Down here in Brazil, they do raise corn and soybeans. But you gotta remember these are different countries. And one of the problems that happens is what I talked about in my last several videos. It's the Federal Reserve. It's the dollar exchange rate. And while you're having huge amounts of domestic, meaning within the United States, devaluation currency, meaning it doesn't buy shit here in the United States, it rises against other currencies, which I've already shown that in other videos. So if Canada, if their dollar is much, much less to the United States dollar in exchange rate, not in buying capacity within their country, but within exchange rate, a Canadian is not going to pay a lot of extra of their money to buy something from the United States, but in turn, it makes it very easy for the United States to buy something from Canada. Let's just take a look here at the Brazilian dollar. You guys need to remember that corn is traded in US dollars, but not necessarily settled in US dollars. So if corn in the United States is $4.50, that means that corn in Brazil is $4.50 American as well. But when you convert that to their dollar, that equals $25.78 in their currency. So yes, the corn that they're selling is the same price as it is here in the United States. So in the United States, if I get $4.50 for my corn, and I go to buy a cheeseburger that's $6, our currency, United States dollar, it took more than one bushel of corn to buy the cheeseburger. If I'm in Brazil and the cheeseburger in their currency is $6, you can see that it would take much less than one bushel of corn in their currency to buy the cheeseburger. So as long as they're doing domestic business and not importing a tractor from the United States, they're doing wonderfully. They're doing great domestically. And then they can take this $25, which is equal to $4.50, they could reduce that to say $16, which basically is about, let's just figure that out, $3. Let's just figure $3 US corn. There you go. And they still make money on it in their currency. And then that obliterates us, because now they can sell corn at global scale for $3 US, while we have to have $4.50 US, and probably realistically, because of our currency devaluation in the United States, we probably need $5. So in other words, we can't compete on a global scale. So really more the problem than needing to, quote, diversify would be figuring out a way to level currencies to make exchange rates more accurate. And that's been largely in part, again, where I showed you a video from several videos back about how the dollar has done nothing more than appreciate since the 2% inflation mandate. So if there's things that can be raised here that cannot be raised here, and things that can be raised here but not here, if your dollar was all the same, you just exchange them. It's a global production, global market. Now when we had all this pandemic money and they devalued our buying power here within the United States, but the dollar still appreciated against other countries, that became a big problem, because it means we can no longer export, but we can import. Then when the Fed, they do something called demand destruction. Hey, corn went up, and the reason it went up was because they had droughts over here, or maybe there was a war going on that stopped exports. That's why things go up. Commodities react to supply and demand. And we had the Black Sea deal, so grain went through the roof. And that's literally inflation. Was too much money chasing too few goods. So if there's not enough goods, what the Fed says is, let's just artificially crush the demand for goods. Well, hey, I like corn and I want to eat corn, but the Fed's not going to allow you to eat corn because they're going to make it so goddamn high priced that you're not going to be able to afford to buy it, so you're just going to do without corn, or you're going to have to figure out other ways of getting it. That's pretty much what's going on. It's not really a diversity issue, it's a Federal Reserve issue. Now, after explaining all this, and hopefully everybody watching all the other videos, that kind of sums up the need for CRP. When you have too much production, and obviously you don't have an export market anymore because of policy or Federal Reserve policy, you need to get rid of acres. So the quick, easy solution to do that is to put CRP, take acres out of production. And for those guys that think that it ought to get rid of the program, then you're right back to what I explained earlier in this video about flooding markets, which just creates more boom and bust cycles. So hopefully this is starting to sink in. If not, ask questions below and I will continue on the series.